Looking back, I never thought I'd be the woman scrolling through old Facebook messages at 2 in the morning while my husband snored next to me. But here's the thing about marriage. Sometimes you wake up one day and realize you're living with a stranger who leaves dirty socks on the bathroom floor and thinks microwaved leftovers count as dinner. I'm Kelly, I'm 29, and 3 years ago I thought I was marrying my best friend. Carter seemed like everything I wanted back then. Stable job at some warehouse, decent looking enough, made me laugh. The problem is, people change, or maybe they just stop trying. These days, Carter comes home covered in dust and grease, grunts hello, and plants himself on our cheap couch to watch whatever sports highlights are on. When I try to talk about my day or anything beyond what's for dinner, his eyes glaze over like I'm speaking a foreign language. That's when Chuck messaged me. Chuck Henderson. My college boyfriend, the one who used to write me poetry and take me to art galleries. The one who remembered that I majored in literature before I settled for my current job answering phones all day. His profile picture showed him in a nice suit, standing in front of some fancy building, looking exactly like the successful man I always knew he'd become. Kelly? Is this really you? You look amazing. Such a simple message, but it made my heart race in a way Carter's presence hadn't in months. We started chatting about old times, about professors we remembered, about that trip we took to the coast during spring break. Chuck remembered details about me that Carter never bothered to learn, like how I used to want to travel to Italy or how I collected vintage books. The conversations moved from Facebook to texting, then to long phone calls when Carter was at work. Chuck told me about his life. He worked in consulting now, traveled for business, had an apartment downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows. He asked about my dreams, my goals, things Carter never seemed curious about anymore. You always were too smart and beautiful for small-town life, Chuck texted one evening while I sat across from Carter, who was absorbed in some mindless TV show. I can't believe you settled. Settled. The word hit me like a slap because it felt true. I had settled, hadn't I? For a man who thought date night meant picking up pizza and renting a movie. For a life where the most exciting thing that happened was when Carter's friend Hayden came over to watch games and drink cheap beer. I started paying more attention to how Carter looked when he came home. His hair always messy, his clothes stained, his hands rough and dirty. When Chuck sent me photos from business dinners at upscale restaurants, the contrast was stark. Here was a man who wore actual dress shirts, who knew about wine, who could hold a conversation about something other than work schedules and weekend plans. Remember how good we were together? Chuck asked during one of our late-night calls. The chemistry we had? I did remember. The passion, the connection, the way Chuck used to look at me like I was the most fascinating woman in the world. Carter looked at me now like I was part of the furniture. Familiar, reliable, but not particularly interesting. I started making more effort with my appearance, joined a gym, bought new clothes, got my hair done. When Carter barely noticed, it stung more than it should have, but Chuck noticed everything. Complimented my new profile pictures, told me how stunning I looked, how lucky any man would be to have me. The guilt was there at first. When Carter would try to kiss me goodnight, I'd turn my head or pretend to be asleep. When he'd reach for me on Sunday mornings, I'd make excuses about being tired or having things to do. I started keeping my phone face down during dinner, started taking longer showers so I could text Chuck without interruption. You seem distant lately, Carter mentioned one evening, actually looking up from the television. Everything okay? I'm fine, I snapped, irritated that he'd chosen now to pay attention. Just tired. He nodded and went back to his show, proving my point exactly. This was the extent of Carter's emotional intelligence, asking once and accepting whatever answer I gave, no matter how obviously false. Chuck, meanwhile, wanted to know everything. How I felt, what I thought, what made me happy or sad. He remembered conversations we'd had weeks earlier and followed up on things I'd mentioned. When I complained about Carter's lack of ambition, Chuck listened and validated my frustrations. You deserve someone who appreciates what an incredible woman you are, he said, someone who challenges you intellectually. The first time we met for coffee, I told Carter I was meeting an old college friend, technically true. Chuck looked even better in person, wearing a tailored jacket and expensive watch. He stood when I approached the table, kissed my cheek, told me I looked more beautiful than ever. We talked for 3 hours, about books, about travel, about dreams and goals, and all the things Carter never seemed interested in discussing. Chuck listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, made me feel intelligent and desirable in ways I'd forgotten were possible. "Your husband is a lucky man," he said as we prepared to leave, but his tone suggested he thought Carter didn't deserve that luck. I started meeting Chuck regularly. Coffee dates became lunch dates. Lunch dates became long walks downtown, talking and laughing in ways that reminded me of who I used to be before I became half of a boring married couple. Carter remained oblivious, or maybe he just didn't care enough to notice. When I came home from these meetings energized and happy, he'd grunt hello and ask what was for dinner. When I tried to engage him in actual conversation, he'd give me half his attention while scrolling through his phone or watching TV. "We never talk anymore," I told him one evening. "We're talking now," he replied, not looking away from the screen. "No, we're not. You're watching TV and I'm trying to have a conversation." He muted the volume with an exaggerated sigh. "Okay, what do you want to talk about?" But that was the problem. He didn't want to talk. He was humoring me, giving me his attention like it was a chore. With Chuck, conversations flowed naturally. He was genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. The emotional affair intensified gradually. Chuck started calling me beautiful, telling me how much he missed me, how often he thought about our college relationship. He'd send me photos from his business trips, expensive hotels, fancy restaurants, the kind of life I'd dreamed about, but never experienced with Carter. "I keep thinking about what might have been," Chuck admitted during one of our coffee dates. "If we hadn't broken up, if we'd stayed together." "We were so young," I said, but my heart was racing. Maybe we were just ahead of our time. Maybe now we're both mature enough to appreciate what we had. I started fantasizing about a different life. Traveling with Chuck, attending gallery openings and theater performances, being with someone who valued my mind as much as my appearance, someone who wore suits instead of work clothes, who could discuss literature and current events, who made me feel sophisticated instead of ordinary. Carter, meanwhile, seemed perfectly content with our mundane routine. Work, dinner, television, bed. Rinse and repeat. When I suggested we go out somewhere nice for our anniversary, he picked a chain restaurant and seemed confused when I mentioned wanting to try the new French place downtown. "Why would we pay twice as much for smaller portions?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. That's when I knew we were fundamentally incompatible. Carter was satisfied with mediocrity, while I craved something more meaningful and exciting. The texting with Chuck became constant. Good morning messages, photos of his meals, late-night conversations about everything and nothing. I found myself looking forward to his messages more than Carter's presence. When Carter tried to show me something funny on his phone, I felt annoyed by the interruption. "You're always on that thing lately," Carter observed one evening. "Work stuff," I lied easily, not even looking up from typing my response to Chuck's latest message about missing me. Chuck started getting bolder, more romantic in his communications. He'd tell me how beautiful I was, how he couldn't stop thinking about me, how seeing me again had reminded him of what real connection felt like. "I know this is complicated," he texted one night, "but I can't pretend I don't still have feelings for you." I stared at that message for a long time, my heart pounding. Carter was asleep beside me, mouth slightly open, completely unaware that his wife was having an emotional affair with her ex-boyfriend. Part of me felt guilty, but a larger part felt justified. Carter had stopped trying years ago. He'd become complacent, taking me for granted, assuming I'd always be there no matter how little effort he put into our relationship. "I have feelings too," I finally typed back. "I just don't know what to do about them. Maybe we don't have to do anything right now. Maybe it's enough to know we still care about each other." But it wasn't enough. The more time I spent talking to Chuck, the more dissatisfied I became with my marriage. Carter's laugh seemed too loud, his table manners too casual, his conversation too limited. When he'd try to be affectionate, I'd find excuses to avoid physical contact. The thought of being intimate with him when my heart was elsewhere felt wrong. Chuck sensed my growing unhappiness and fed into it, validating every complaint I had about Carter. "You're too intelligent and vibrant to be stuck in a relationship that doesn't fulfill you," he said during one of our longer phone conversations. "Life is short, Kelly. You deserve to be with someone who appreciates all the amazing qualities you have." I started staying out later, claiming errands took longer than expected or traffic was heavy. Carter never questioned these explanations, which only reinforced my belief that he didn't really care what I did with my time. The night everything changed, Carter came home earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen, texting Chuck about meeting for dinner later that week, smiling at something he'd written about wanting to take me somewhere special. "We need to talk," Carter said, setting his keys on the counter with unusual force. I looked up, immediately defensive. "About what?" "About whoever you're texting." My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. "Excuse me? Are you seriously questioning me right now?" Carter pulled out his phone and showed me screenshots, messages between Chuck and me that he must have seen when I left my laptop open. Nothing explicitly romantic, but intimate enough. Inside jokes, late-night conversations, plans to meet. "Who's Chuck?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. I felt cornered, caught, and my first instinct was to attack. "You went through my private messages? Are you kidding me right now?" "Answer the question." "He's a friend from college. We reconnected on social media. It's completely innocent." Carter laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Innocent. Right. Friends don't text each other at 2 in the morning about missing each other." I stood up, chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You have absolutely no right to invade my privacy like this. This is exactly why we have problems. You're controlling and paranoid." "I'm paranoid because you gave me every reason to be." His voice remained level, which somehow made it worse. "You want to talk about problems? Let's talk about how you haven't touched me in weeks. How you suddenly need to run errands every night. How you pull away every time I try to kiss you. Maybe I don't want to be touched by someone who doesn't trust me. Trust is earned. You stopped earning it months ago." I grabbed my wine glass, taking a long drink to buy time. My mind raced, trying to figure out how to spin this situation, how to make him the villain instead of me. "Fine," I said finally. "Yes, I've been talking to Chuck. He actually listens to me. He makes me feel appreciated, something you haven't done in years." Carter stared at me. "I work 50 hours a week to keep a roof over our heads. I do the grocery shopping because you can't be bothered. I cook dinner most nights, but sure, I'm the one who doesn't appreciate you." Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was months of built-up resentment, maybe it was just the fury of being caught and cornered. But I decided to go nuclear. "You want to know the truth? Fine, here's the truth." I looked him straight in the eyes. "Chuck was my boyfriend before you. We dated for 2 years, and he was better in bed than you'll ever be. I still think about him. There, happy now?" The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Carter went completely still, his face unreadable. I expected him to yell, to throw something, to give me the dramatic reaction that would let me paint him as the unreasonable one. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Okay." That threw me off completely. "Okay? That's all you have to say? What else is there to say?" He walked past me toward the bedroom. "You just told me everything I needed to know." "Where are you going?" "Packing." I followed him down the hall, panic starting to set in. "Wait, what? You're leaving? Over this?" He pulled his overnight bag from the closet and started grabbing clothes. "You just compared me to your ex and told me he was better. In what world did you think I'd stick around after that?" I was angry. People say things when they're angry. Yeah, they do. He zipped up the bag. They say what they've been thinking all along. My tone shifted, trying to manipulate the situation. "Baby, come on. Let's just calm down and talk about this. I didn't mean it. I was just trying to hurt you because you hurt me by going through my messages." He grabbed his toiletries from the bathroom. "You hurt me way before this evening. This just made it easy for me to leave." "You're being ridiculous. Where are you even going to go? Not your problem anymore." I followed him to the living room, arms crossed, torn between anger and disbelief. "If you walk out that door, don't expect me to be here when you decide to come crawling back." Carter stopped and looked at me one last time. I won't be coming back. Ever. Enjoy thinking about Chuck. He walked out and closed the door behind him. My phone started buzzing immediately. Carter calling, probably to apologize and beg me to take him back. But when I looked, it was Chuck returning my earlier text. I ignored Carter's calls and focused on Chuck instead. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? Freedom to pursue the connection I really craved? But as the hours passed and the reality of the situation sank in, doubt started creeping in. The next morning, I called Chuck to tell him what had happened. I expected support, maybe even excitement that we could finally be together properly. "Wow," he said after I explained everything. "That's intense. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I mean, it's complicated, but maybe it's for the best. Now we can see where this goes without any barriers." There was a pause. "Kelly, I think maybe we should slow down a bit. This is all happening really fast." "Slow down?" "Chuck, we've been building toward this for months." "I know, but you just left your husband. Maybe you need time to process everything before jumping into something new." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Are you having second thoughts?" "No, it's not that. I just think we should be careful. Take things one step at a time." After we hung up, I felt confused and unsettled. This wasn't the reaction I'd expected. Chuck had been the one pushing our connection, telling me I deserved better, encouraging my dissatisfaction with Carter. Now that I was available, he suddenly wanted to pump the brakes? Carter, meanwhile, had filed for divorce papers within days. His lawyer contacted me, and suddenly everything became coldly legal and final. I tried calling Carter directly, but he'd blocked my number. I reached out through mutual friends, but they all gave me the same message. Carter didn't want to talk, and all communication needed to go through his attorney. The apartment felt different without him. Quieter, but not in a peaceful way. Emptier. I found myself missing stupid things. The sound of him making coffee in the morning, the way he'd hum while doing dishes, even his terrible jokes during commercial breaks. Chuck's messages became less frequent over the following weeks. When I suggested meeting up, he always had excuses. Work was busy, he had other commitments, maybe next week. The passionate declarations of missing me had been replaced by polite small talk. 2 months after Carter left, I discovered I was pregnant. The timing was unmistakable. It had to be Chuck's. We'd only been together physically a few times, during afternoons when Carter was at work and I'd claimed to be running errands. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd destroyed my marriage for a man who was now treating me like an inconvenience. When I told Chuck about the pregnancy, his response was immediate and brutal. "Are you sure it's mine?" "Of course I'm sure. You're the only person I've been with besides Carter, and Carter and I hadn't." We weren't intimate for months before he left. "This is really bad timing, Kelly. I'm not in a position to deal with this right now." "Deal with this? It's your baby." "Look, I care about you, but I never promised you anything serious. We were just reconnecting, having fun. I can't be responsible for the choices you made in your marriage." "The choices I made? You encouraged me to leave him." "I never told you to leave your husband. I just listened when you complained about him." The gaslighting was so smooth, so complete that for a moment I questioned my own memory. But no, Chuck had absolutely pushed me toward ending my marriage. He'd validated every criticism of Carter, told me I deserved better, made me feel justified in my emotional affair. "So that's it? You're just going to abandon me?" "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm being realistic about what this was. You're a married woman going through a divorce. I can't get involved in that kind of drama." He blocked me on social media that same day, changed his phone number within the week, completely disappeared from my life as if our months of connection had never happened. Meanwhile, Carter's divorce proceedings moved forward with ruthless efficiency. Since we had no children and few assets, there wasn't much to fight over. The apartment lease was in both our names. But Carter had already found somewhere else to live. He took half of our minimal savings and left me with everything else, which wasn't much. I tried reaching out to his family, to our mutual friends, hoping someone would convince him to talk to me. But Carter had told them the truth about what I'd said, about Chuck, about everything. Their sympathy was limited. "You really hurt him, Kelly," his sister Kristen told me when I called her. What you said about Chuck being better, that was cruel. Carter loved you completely, and you threw it back in his face. I was angry. I didn't mean it. But you did mean it, didn't you? Otherwise, why were you talking to Chuck in the first place? I couldn't answer that because she was right. I had meant it, at least in that moment. I had been comparing Chuck and Carter for months, and Chuck had been winning every comparison. The pregnancy progressed, and my financial situation became increasingly desperate. Without Carter's income, I could barely afford the apartment. I had to move to a smaller, cheaper place in a worse neighborhood. My job barely covered basic expenses, and with a baby coming, I was looking at even more costs. I watched from a distance as Carter seemed to thrive. Through mutual friends, I heard that he'd moved to a nicer apartment, was doing well at work, seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years. The contrast with my own situation was stark and painful. 8 months after our divorce was finalized, I ran into Carter at a grocery store. He looked good, healthier, more confident, wearing clothes that actually fit him properly. He was with a woman I didn't recognize, someone pretty and well-dressed who was laughing at something he'd said. They were clearly together. Clearly happy. The woman, Hazel, I learned later, was touching his arm as they talked, looking at him with obvious affection. Carter seemed relaxed and content in a way I hadn't seen in years. He noticed me before I could escape, and for a moment our eyes met across the produce section. There was no anger in his expression, no hurt, just polite acknowledgement, like I was an acquaintance he barely remembered. "Kelly?" he said with a nod. "Hi, Carter. You look, well." "Thanks. You too." His eyes dropped to my obvious pregnancy, but he didn't comment. Hazel squeezed his arm. "I'll grab the milk," she said, giving me a curious but not unfriendly look before walking away. "Is she?" I started to ask. "We've been together about 6 months," Carter said simply. "She's great." 6 months. He'd moved on completely while I was still dealing with the consequences of my choices. Standing there heavily pregnant and alone, facing the man I'd destroyed my marriage to leave, the full weight of my situation hit me. "Carter, I hope everything works out for you, Kelly. I really do." He started to walk away, then turned back. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you found what you were looking for." But that was the problem. I hadn't found what I was looking for. I'd thrown away something real and stable and loving for a fantasy that disappeared the moment it became inconvenient. I gave birth to a son 3 weeks later. Alone because Chuck had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with us. My parents helped when they could, but they were disappointed in the choices I'd made. My sister Kristen tried to be supportive, but even she struggled to hide her judgment. The baby was beautiful and healthy, but raising him alone was harder than I'd ever imagined. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the financial stress, it was overwhelming. I found myself thinking about Carter more and more, remembering how reliable and steady he'd been. How he would have been there for every feeding, every diaper change, every milestone. Chuck, meanwhile, had completely vanished from social media. I heard through college friends that he'd gotten engaged to someone else, a successful attorney who matched his lifestyle and ambitions. The life I'd thought I wanted with him, he was building with someone else. A year and a half after Carter left, I was struggling to make ends meet as a single mother. Working full-time while paying for childcare ate up most of my income. The apartment was too small, the neighborhood wasn't great, and I was constantly stressed about money. That's when I saw Carter's engagement announcement on social media. He was marrying Hazel, the woman I'd seen him with at the grocery store. The photos showed them hiking together at what looked like a nice restaurant, clearly happy and in love. Hazel was beautiful, in a natural, genuine way. The kind of woman who looked good without trying too hard. She was a nurse, according to her profile. Someone who helped people for a living. The engagement photos were taken at some scenic overlook, both of them laughing and looking genuinely joyful. Carter looked like a completely different person from the tired, taken-for-granted husband I'd lived with. He looked energized, appreciated, truly happy. I stared at those photos for a long time, holding my crying son, sitting in my cramped apartment with its thin walls and broken air conditioning. This was the life I'd chosen. This was what my pursuit of something better had gotten me. The final blow came 6 months later, when I learned through a mutual friend that Carter and Hazel had bought a house together. A real house, with a yard and a garage and room to grow. The kind of life Carter and I could have had if I hadn't been so focused on what I thought I was missing. That night, after I'd finally gotten my son to sleep, I sat on my cheap couch in my tiny apartment and really looked at my life. Really faced what I'd done and what I'd lost. I had destroyed a marriage to a good man because I'd been bored and restless and convinced I deserved something more exciting. I'd thrown away stability and love and partnership for an affair that evaporated the moment it became real. I'd chosen passion over commitment, fantasy over reality, and ended up with neither. Carter had been right to leave. I had been thinking those cruel things about him for months before I said them out loud. I had been comparing him unfavorably to Chuck, taking him for granted, emotionally checking out of our marriage long before he walked out the door. The worst part was that I could see now what I'd been too selfish and immature to see then. Carter had loved me completely. He'd worked hard to provide for us, had been faithful and reliable and kind. His crime had been becoming comfortable in our relationship, assuming I was as committed as he was. I'd mistaken his security for complacency, his contentment for lack of ambition. I'd wanted drama and passion and excitement, and I'd been willing to destroy something real to get it. Now Carter had found someone who appreciated what he offered. Someone who saw his stability as a strength rather than a weakness. Someone who valued loyalty and commitment and the quiet satisfaction of building a life together. And I was alone, struggling to raise another man's child, facing the reality that some mistakes can't be undone, and some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. I'd gotten exactly what I deserved, the consequences of my choices, the reality of prioritizing fantasy over substance, the isolation that comes from betraying someone who truly loved you. Carter was happy. He'd found someone who deserved his love and gave it back freely. And I was left with the life I'd chosen, finally understanding that what I'd had with him had been exactly what I'd needed. I'd just been too foolish to realize it until it was gone forever.